Hello, U.S. history students. This is a continuation, the third part of chapter 24, section 3. So originally we started out with President Ford, talking about the 1976 election in which President Carter from the Democratic Party wins the election, becomes president. Okay. The part 2 was about the domestic issues of President Carter. Today, we're going to talk about the foreign policy of President Carter. Okay, so what does he inherit? What does he not inherit from the previous administration? So, one thing he does not inherit from President Ford, right, is that Vietnam is over. Unfortunately, all of Vietnam succumbed to communism and is one unified country under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh. Okay. However, what President Carter does inherit, right, is a continued relationship with the Soviet Union, right, a continuation of the Cold War. However, when he is elected president, right, it is a period of détente. So it's actually a period of better feelings, friendlier relationship with the Soviet Union. And also what President Carter has to deal with a large amount of disruption and turmoil in the Middle East. So we're going to talk about first his agenda of human rights, and then we're going to talk about two major issues under his administration regarding the Middle East. Here is an agreement, the Camp David Accords, okay, which is a definite positive for him, a thumbs up. And then we're going to talk about the 1979 Iran hostage crisis, which is definitely a thumbs down for him, okay? So President Carter's foreign policy was dictated by human rights, okay? Instead of just talking about power like Nixon did with realpolitik, or about just attempting to stop the spread of communism, this one was regarding human rights, okay? Meaning that if you, as a nation, protect individual rights, such as the rights you see declared in the Declaration of Independence, right, in terms of democracy, the Bill of Rights, all the amendments, right, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the freedom against unfair government intrusion into your life. Those are the nations that the United States would support. Okay. Well, he did follow his word. Okay, when he cut off aid to dictatorships who used violence to control the people in Argentina and Brazil. However, the dictatorships, South Korea and the Philippines, were continuing to receive aid and help from the United States. And those dictatorships did not seem to flow with the human rights agenda of President Carter. Okay? He also heavily criticized the Soviet Union for their violation of civil rights, okay, and human rights. And we know that just in 1974, we had the Helsinki Accords, where Brezhnev over here, the leader of the Soviet Union, basically agreed to the protection of human rights, the protection of people who spoke out against the government. But the reality was that was not really followed. Okay. So we have President Carter signing an agreement with the Soviet Premier Brezhnev, okay? SALT II. This is the second agreement, right? Strategic Arms Limitation Talks or Treaty that goes all the way back to President Nixon, right? Which limits the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles we call ICBMs. So at least we have a continuation of negotiations between the two countries, especially regarding nuclear weapons, okay? So each of them signed the agreement. However, before it could be ratified in the United States, remember, treaties have to be ratified by the Senate, something happened. Okay? In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded the country of Afghanistan. Okay? And that basically broke détente off permanently. The United States would not have a good relationship with the Soviet Union. Okay? The Soviet Union will only last another decade. Okay, but they invaded Afghanistan, and the Soviets were there for 10 years and did a terrible job. And it was similar to a Vietnam. Some people call it the Soviet Vietnam, in which you have a dominant military, advanced technologically speaking, okay, well-trained troops who were not able to beat basically at that time what we would call a third world country, or what we would call an underdeveloped country right now, who was definitely lacking in resources, lacking in training, lacking in technology. Okay, so they were not able to successfully turn Afghanistan into a communist country. The United States was greatly concerned because they had a good relationship. The United States was concerned because what's going to happen if the Soviet Union takes over Afghanistan, the neighboring countries, right, in the region, Iran, Iraq, and so on, right, the major oil producers in the world, you know about our reliance on oil. So if the Soviet Union is able to get Afghanistan, right, domino theory, maybe the next few steps are those major countries which are oil producers. And America is already in trouble regarding oil. It would be even bigger trouble, bigger issues. Okay, so that basically officially ends détente. So the Soviet Union and the United States will not get along. Ronald Reagan will make it a point for the 1980 election to talk about the United States' weakness in stopping the spread of communism. And this is going to be one of his key talking points, that if America had stood up strong to the Soviet Union, they would have never done this in the first place. Also, the 1980 Summer Olympics were in Moscow, and Jimmy Carter said, we're boycotting them. Okay, so all those people that were getting ready to be in the Summer Olympics for the U.S. were not allowed to participate. And then in 84, the Olympics were in Los Angeles. Yes, I was old enough to be there and saw some of the events. Okay, and the Soviet Union boycotted those Olympics. Okay. Well, let's look at triumph and crisis in the Middle East. So you see our up arrow and our down arrow. So Camp David Accords in 1977, a gigantic victory for the United States and for literally the safety of the world. Okay, Camp David, a presidential retreat in Maryland. Okay, so you have President Carter there, and I showed you in the first screen the picture of the three people shaking hands. It was an agreement between Israel and Egypt. And remember, Israel was created in 1948, right, just after the end of World War II in 1945. However, many people in the region did not believe that Israel had the right to exist. Okay? And so what happens is, literally, as soon as they became a country, they went to war with many of the surrounding Arab countries. Okay? So this is the first large-scale agreement we have between Israel, right, and an Arab country such as Egypt. All right. So for the first time in history since 1948, right, we're going on 3 decades or so, right? What happens is Egypt gets some of their land back that was taken by Israel, okay? And Egypt says, we won't attack you, to Israel, and we formally recognize your right to exist. So hopefully this is the first step of the Arab countries in the Middle Eastern area having a positive relationship with Israel. However, to this day, we know that's not necessarily true. Okay? Well, not true, I should say. Okay? However, at the time, it was seen as a major victory. It also showed the strength and importance of the United States that each of these sides, Israel and Egypt, right, would both be willing to come to the United States and trust Jimmy Carter to make an agreement. So Jimmy Carter is riding high in 1977, right? Because there's not big issues with the Soviet Union yet, okay? And he makes this major agreement between Israel and Egypt. But in 1979, right, the script is flipped, okay? We know that the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, and that just completely breaks the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the United States and Jimmy Carter also have to face the Iran hostage crisis. Okay, again, this is some information that hopefully you remember or you went over last year in your world history class. So in November of 1979, what happened is armed students seized the embassy in the American embassy in the capital of Tehran, and they took 52 Americans hostage for over 1 year. And literally, it was the most important story every single day for over a year. And Jimmy Carter's in a very difficult situation because obviously he wants to take the Americans home, right? But he knows that anything he does, right, can lead to the death of these Americans, okay? Well, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. So Ayatollah is a title. It's not his first name, okay? And Khomeini, what happened was he actually was a very conservative, right, Muslim cleric, and teacher, and he had to leave, okay, Iran, because the Shah, who was what we call the king at the time, called him the Shah, right? He was being supported by Americans and Western Europeans because he said, here's our land, here's the oil, and we'll take the oil. So Iran was producing so much oil. American businesses were making so much money, right? A small percentage of people in Iran were making a tremendous amount of money from this oil, but it didn't trickle down to the people. In addition, the Ayatollah also believed that the American value system, right, what we believe in, what we find acceptable in terms of how we speak to each other, in terms of education, in terms of religion in our life, in terms of music, culture, family relationships, husband-wife relationships, he believed all of those were a detriment to his Muslim society, right? He wanted to create a society in which the religious leaders are the political leaders. They are one in the same, what we would call a theocracy. So he calls for a revolution due to American interference. He's saying this is just another example of colonialism or imperialism. And at the time, many people actually heard the Ayatollah Khomeini and his speeches, right, against American interference, right? Because people would smuggle in from other countries, they would smuggle in cassette tapes for people to listen to and hear his speeches. Because remember, no internet back then, okay? The hostages were released after 444 days, basically the day that, Reagan is president, okay? So we definitely see it's a political move, and President Ronald Reagan is going to come in 1980. We'll talk a little about the 1980 election coming up soon. So you see here, it was just mistiming. Who knows? Maybe if the elections were 1978, Jimmy Carter would have won, got another chance. But no, there is no way with this Iran hostage crisis and high oil prices, there is no way that Jimmy Carter has a chance to win. And the Malay speech didn't help him as well. Okay? I will talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye.